Shalom Aleichem, how are we doing? Want to continue here with our study of Hegyonei Halacha on Tefillin. A lot of fascinating things here that I want to share with you and learn with you. I'm just trying to fix the technology here. Let's see if that works. No, not yet. Almost. Okay, that's a little bit better, maybe. And I'm using the old link that we've been using all along, although all my other shiurim are now on a link called Daf Yomi, which makes it a little easier for me, so I don't have to always look around for the right link for the right shiur. So maybe at some stage we'll shift over to that link for Daf Yomi. Now here on page 164, we started our study of the os of Tefillin, and we said that Shabbos has an os, and therefore we don't wear Tefillin on Shabbos. That itself, as we'll soon see, is Machlokas Tanoim. And the question that was asked was, why on Shabbos do we not wear Tefillin? I mean, obviously the Gemara says because it's called an os, and we don't need the os of Tefillin, but we could have two osos. In fact, as we pointed out last time, just as a review, there are three basic mitzvahs that have the categorization of os. And Rav Saji Goen, in his Sefer HaMitzvos, points out that we always have with us two out of the three of the osos. And for example, during the week, we have Milah, which is an os, and Tefillin, which is an os. On Shabbos, we have Milah, and instead of Tefillin, we have Shabbos. So we have Shabbos and Milah, or during the week, Milah and Tefillin. In Milah, it says, V'hayel li os bris. In Shabbos, it says, os hi beini v'einechem. And in Tefillin, it says, V'hayel choli os. And the Ramban says that the os of Shabbos begins before the mitzvah of Tefillin could come, because already at Shabbos at night, we already have entered into the os of Tefillin. So if you have to choose between Shabbos as an os and Tefillin as an os, the Ramban points out that we give preference and priority to Shabbos because Shabbos came first, and it grabbed already the shetach, so to speak, the area for the os. Now, the Ramah points out that when we get to Musaf on Rosh Chodesh, we take off at Tefillin, but the Ramah identifies that with the Kedusha of Keser, which is Nusach Sfarad. And the Mishnah Berurah points out, and again, I'm just reviewing what we ended up last week so we can move forward with this essay, is that the Kedusha of Keser is a Kedusha of some keser that you wear on your head, and to go ahead and therefore wear tefillin in place of that crown would sort of like be an insult to the keser. But the implication of this whole thing would be that if our nusach is nusach Ashkenaz, and we don't say the kedusha of keser, then there should be no problem wearing tefillin during Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. However, what we ended up with is that the Levush has another explanation. He says that the Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh is a manifestation of the same os of a Yontif. And therefore, just like Yontif has an os, and therefore it's not the time for Tefillin, which is an os, so too Musaf on Rosh Chodesh is an os because of the Karban Musaf, and therefore it's not appropriate to wear Tefillin, which is an os, when you already reached and achieved the os of Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. So it comes out that according to Levush, even those who pray Nusach Ashkenaz would take off that Tefillin before Musaf. But it's very interesting that the os of Rosh Chodesh is tied up to the Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. That's what makes Rosh Chodesh really a unique day. There's no mitzvah of Simcha per se on Rosh Chodesh, but there is a Karban Musaf, which is a quasi Simcha. And the Torah says, B'yom Simchaschem u'v'moadechem u'v'roshei chodshechem. So Rosh Chodesh is also called Yom Simchaschem. And that means it's connected to this os, and therefore we don't wear tefillin. Now, the truth is that there's another os, which is also an os bris in the Torah's language, and that's the keshes. And Hashem says that when you see the keshes ba'anan, you know that this is an os bris, that I will never destroy the world with a flood. God commits himself. Now, a keshes is something that we see during the weekdays, b'yamos hachol. And it would seem, therefore, that if we see a keshes, maybe we shouldn't be wearing tefillin, because just like Shabbos is an os, and therefore we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos, keshes is an os, and we shouldn't be wearing tefillin on the day on which we see the keshes. So although this kasha is actually raised in a serious vein, the answer seems to be also quite simple, quite basic. The os of the keshes is not an os that's miyuchad l'klal Yisrael. It's a sign from heaven for the entire world. And therefore, a Jew has to be, as we saw the name of the Smag, has to be connected with the os bris that connects him to the Almighty as a Jew. So he's got Milah, and then he has Tefillin. But if you're going to tell me, well, we're not going to wear tefillin because of the keshes, then you've actually dropped the ball on that os, which manifests the special relationship between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to the os of the keshes. So we want to begin today's discussion, after having reviewed the beginning half of this essay, on page 167. And once again, I thank David for spreading these. Again, it's an amateur photographer, because until you can get hold of the Sefer, I'm going to try to take these pictures with my phone. So they're not exactly.
I have ordered it for Berzon.
Do they tell you when?
I ordered it. He said it was going to be in this week, but.
All right. Maybe by next week we'll have it. That'll take a tremendous headache off my head, because I can't begin to tell you, I'm jumping around this room and my kitchen and this room and that room, trying to find a room without shadow. And, that for that, you need to be a professional photographer. But be that as it may, getting back to our learning for today, because that's what's most crucial. We have a Mishnah in Eruvin that discusses a case in which you find pairs of tefillin that are out there in a public area. Again, it's not clear how they got there, but they're there and they're not shmura. There's no shmir on those tefillin. And because of Kedushas tefillin, it's critical that you bring these zugos of tefillin into the house in a private area. But the only problem is it's Shabbos, and you can't carry anything on Shabbos from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. But is there a possibility of wearing the tefillin? And then the tefillin becomes a malbush rather than a masli, and you're not carrying the tefillin. And the Mishnah says, Misha Matzah B'yom HaShabbos Zugos Shel Tefillin, and they're out there in a public area. Munachim B'Bizayon, Mutar lo lachnisan lemakam mishtamer, even without an eruv. So the question is, how do you bring in these tefillin? And on that, we have machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Gamliel on the top of page 167. The Tanakama says the following: take each pair of tefillin one at a time. Don't wear both of them simultaneously, and we'll see why, because of the problem of Al-Tosif. But one at a time, you're allowed to wear them. Rabbi Gamliel goes a step further. He allows you to wear two pairs of tefillin at the same time. And somehow you're able to tie down the shalyad of two pairs of tefillin and the shalrosh, and carry two pairs of tefillin at the same time. And then, of course, if there are more pairs of tefillin that you have to, so you go back and you do this back and forth. According to the Tanakh will allow you one pair of tefillin at a time. and Rav Gamliel will allow you 2 pairs of tefillin at a time. What's this machlokas all about? The Gemara explains. This is the machlokas tanoim about whether Shabbos is man tefillin or not. And the Tanna Kama holds that according to Torah law, Shabbos is the zman for tefillin. The Chacham made Gzeira, they didn't want you to wear tefillin because maybe part of the tefillin will get ripped off, part of the mitzvah, and then you'll end up carrying it inadvertently, and you'll over metaltel Daled Amos just around the Shabbos. But even though the Rabbanan prohibited you, we're going to allow it in the case of bizayon at tefillin. So the Chacham are going to be makir someone who finds tefillin to wear the tefillin, which according to the Doraisa law, he fulfills the mitzvah of tefillin. But again, he's got to wear only 1 pair of tefillin, because if he's being makayim the mitzvah of tefillin, which according to Tanna Kama you could be makayim on Shabbos, then you'd be violating Bal Tosif if you wore 2 pairs of tefillin simultaneously. So take them in 1 at a time. Rav Gamliel holds that Shabbos lavs man tefillin. Shabbos is an os, and tefillin is an os, and the os of Shabbos takes preference over the os of tefillin. So what are we going to allow you to do? We're going to allow you to wear tefillin on Shabbos, which normally we're not excited about, to say the least, because tefillin is an os. And the reason for doing this is because of the bizayon to the tefillin. We don't want to leave them out there in a public area. Now Rav Gamliel adds another point. Otherwise, we're not going to get to first base. And he says, well, by wearing the tefillin, it's called a malbush. Now watch this. Rav Gamliel holds Shabbos lavs man tefillin. And yet he says that wearing the tefillin is called derech malbush. Very great chiddush. And Rav Gamliel says that how much room do you have on your arm? How much room do you have in the middle of your head? Kineged bein einecha? If you have enough room for 2 zugos of tefillin, then that's also considered derech malbush, and there's no violation of otzah. Even though, again, as we said before, I just reiterate, according to Rav Gamliel, normally we would not allow you to wear tefillin on Shabbos, but for the sake of preventing bizayon tefillin, we're going to allow you to wear it, and it's not considered matzah because it's derech malbush. Tanna Kama, on the other hand, says there's no such halacha derech malbush in case of tefillin. Tefillin is not derech malbush unless you have a mitzvah of tefillin. But the Tanna Kama holds that there is a mitzvah of tefillin on Shabbos, but be very careful. Wear only 1 pair of tefillin at a time, because if you wear 2, you're going to violate Bal Tosef, because you're creating a new Tosefes to a mitzvah, as if the mitzvah requires 2 pairs of tefillin. By the way, I don't know if any of you have ever seen people with 2 pairs of tefillin. In Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's common. I don't know about the holy city of Toronto. I don't know. You know, the people in Yerushalayim who wear 2 pairs of tefillin, they are the holy of holies. You know, they're learning Kabbalah, and they do interesting things because they wear the yarmulke in such a way that it covers 1 pair of tefillin, so you only see 1 pair of tefillin. They are sensitive to this issue in the Gemara and Eruvin of Bal Tosef. But based on various sources, it's not just enough that you put 1 tefillin and then another pair of tefillin, you wear them both at the same time. You don't want to give preference to 1 pair of tefillin over the other. One is Rashi, one's Rabbeinu Tam. But getting back to our sugya, we now have a very interesting stira, l'chora, in the Rambam. Because on the one hand, the Rambam paskins like the Tanna Kama, that machnisan zug zug. But the Tanna Kama is based on the fact that there's a mitzvah of tefillin on Shabbos. On the other hand, the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Tefillin that Shabbos ain't a zman tefillin. How can he paskin like the Tanna Kama in the scenario in which he's bringing in tefillin from outside inside on Shabbos and require that you wear 1 pair of tefillin at a time, because 2 pairs of tefillin at a time would be Bal Tosif. That's the Tanakama Shita. Apparently, you are doing the kind of mitzvah tefillin, but if you wear 2 pairs of tefillin, then you're adding to the mitzvah tefillin. I remember Gamliel has Shabbos Lavs on tefillin. Look, or he has no problem about Tosif. He just has a problem with Masui, but the Malbush is going to solve that problem. Even if he wears 2 tefillin at the same time, there's enough room for 2. But the Rambam Paskin, that Shabbos Lavs man tefillin. How can he then pass like the Tanakama that he should be wearing 1 pair of tefillin at a time, which the Gemara identifies as Shabbos man tefillin?
Berzon, why isn't it Bal Tosif when you wear tefillin? If Shabbos is Lavs man tefillin, why isn't it Bal Tosif just to wear the tefillin?
Because Bal Tosif requires a Maisa mitzvah. Like, let's say, for example, you take the Daled Minim, on Sukkot, and it's a Maisa mitzvah. Now you add a 5th min, that makes the Maisa into a Maisa Bal Tosif. But every Bal Tosif violation is predicated on the assumption that you're doing a Maisa mitzvah. If you do something that's not a Maisa mitzvah,
if I take
that's
lulav,
that's not idiosyncrasy, Amarat.
If I take a lulav after Sukkot, or I sit in the sukkah after Sukkot,
no Bal Tosif.
No Bal Tosif, yeah.
It's only Bal Tosif when you have a Maisa mitzvah. If you're Mosif al a mitzvah, that's called Bal Tosif. If you have no mitzvah, then you're a shaita, pardon the expression. Okay, fine. Now, to reconcile this stira in the Rambam, we have a chiddush of the Shagas Aryeh. This is on the top of page 168 for those who want to see it inside, which I appreciate. And believe it or not, he goes back to Rav Gamliel's Shita. Rav Gamliel's Shita was that Shabbos Lavs man tefillin. And we saw the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillin, he passes like Rav Gamliel. But the Shagas Aryeh wants to know, what does that mean, Shabbos Lavs man tefillin, in Rav Gamliel's frame of reference? And there are 2 possibilities. One possibility is that on Shabbos you don't have to wear tefillin. You're potter from tefillin because you already have the Yosef Shabbos. And the other possibility is that Shabbos is aser in tefillin. By wearing tefillin on Shabbos, you, in quotation marks, insult the Yosef Shabbos. And the Shagas Aryeh says that if we take a look at Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and this is a Gemara in Menachos Lamed Vav, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, as opposed to Rabbi Akiva, has a pasuk Ushmarta es hachuka zos limoado miyomim yomima. Miyomim, what's the extra mem? Miyomim, v'lo kol yomim. Prat l'shabbosos v'yomim tovim. So the Torah is telling you, v'shamarta es hachuka. Shmira is always a lo taseh. Right? Whenever the Torah says Hisham Lecha, it's a lot. And the Torah is saying Hisham Lecha, be careful about the mitzvah of Yontif. And what does that mean? It means that miyamim v'lo kol yom, that you should not be wearing tefillin on Yontif. Shagas Aryeh says, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, there's an iser of wearing tefillin on Yontif. And of course on Shabbos as well. Rabbi Akiva has a different pasuk. Now listen to the language of Rabbi Akiva. All this is in the Sugi of Menachos Lamed Vav. Mishet tzarech os. Lecha means litzarkecha. If you need the os, then you should be wearing the os. Yotze Shabbos v'yom tovim, shem gufon os. So therefore on Shabbos, when he says Yotze Shabbos v'yom tovim, what does he mean? That ain't no tzarech os, right? Misha tzarech os, v'hoylech os, wear the tefillin. Misha ain't no tzarech os, namely Shabbos and Yom Tov is gufanos, is ain't no tzarech with tefillin. What does that mean? Ain't no tzarech with tefillin. Is that an Isur or a Ptur? Everybody, I don't hear you.
Sure.
Okay. It's the old Zoom problem. It's a ptur. Ain't no tzarech. When you say a tzarech, that's a ptur. So therefore, let's reconcile the two Ramams. The Rambam, yeah, he paskins that Shabbos loves van tefillin, but he derives it from the pasuk Hayil Chala Os, like Rabbi Akiva, which means that you're part of tefillin, but you're allowed to wear tefillin. So now, what you're going to have is a problem if you wear tefillin on Shabbos. Why? Because if you wear one pair of tefillin on Shabbos, nicha, that's great. But if you want to enjoy the benefit of Rabbi Gamliel's shita and take two pairs of tefillin on Shabbos, now you're going to violate Bal Tosin. Why? Because the Rambam holds that although Shabbos loves man tefillin, it's the lavs man tefillin of the chiyuv of tefillin in the light of Rabbi Akiva. Since the Rambam embraces the shita of Rabbi Akiva, if you wear tefillin on Shabbos, again, as strange as it sounds to our ears, you will fulfill a mitzvah. So you have a ma'aseh mitzvah when you wear tefillin on Shabbos, even though we paskin like the Man Yomer says Shabbos loves man tefillin, and certainly both Rabbi Yossi Glili and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamliel, I mean, all of the Tanoim above unanimously accept that Shabbos loves man tefillin, but in Rabbi Akiva's framework, Shabbos is parted from tefillin, but if you take the initiative, you want three osos, Milah, Shabbos, and tefillin, then Tovalech bracha, you have a kiyum mitzvah, it's a ma'aseh mitzvah. Is Memela, if you're going to take two zugos, the Rambam says you'll be over Bal Tosin. Put us on me, you'll be over Bal Tosin. The Rambam Paskin said Shabbos loves man tefillin. If the Rambam would have accepted Shabbos loves man tefillin of Rabbi Yossi Glili, where the Torah says Shamarta Sachu Kazos Miyamin below Kol Yom Levuute Shabbos Yom Tovim, the Torah is saying leave out tefillin on Shabbos. There would be no problem about Tosin, and you can wear two pairs of tefillin. The Rambam warns us not to wear two pairs of tefillin because of the violation of Al Tosif, even though Shabbos is Lav's man tefillin. That's the Chiddush of Shagas Aryeh, and he bases his case on Rabbi Akiva, who derives it from Sarech Hatom. If you need the oath, then Sarech Hatom. Implying if you don't need the oath, then it's low Sarech Hatom. But you're allowed to wear tefillin, and indeed, you would get a kiyum of tefillin. You may ask, if that be the case, why not run around on Shabbos with tefillin? I've yet to see anyone wear tefillin on Shabbos. I've seen people who wear two pairs of tefillin during the week. I've seen people, I don't want to insult anyone in your neck of the woods, who wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. I'm not going to say a word about that. In my parts of the world, there's no one. But I never saw anyone wear tefillin on Shabbos. I don't even think the Shagas Aryeh wore tefillin on Shabbos. Even though the Shagas Aryeh, was a big machmir on himself. You know that the Shagas Aryeh, for your own information, if you don't know, walked around all of Europe carrying his own kalim. He would not allow eating food. He would not allow himself to eat food that was cooked in anyone's kalim, because he was machmir on Chadash and Chutzlar. And he felt that Chadash is a davar sheish lo matirin, and it's afil be'elef lo batel. There's no bittul on Chadash. So he carried around his kalim wherever he went. You can imagine the Shagasai with a tarmil al teifah, carrying around his kalim, and wherever he went, please cook for me in this kalim. Very strange. So certainly the Shagasai should be wearing tefillin on Shabbos. Paskin like Rabbi Akiva that you don't need the oath of tefillin on Shabbos, but you want to get the oath of tefillin, get an extra oath.
Well, at least I would say that he should make like in this case of finding the tefillin, he should make a bracha then when he puts it on to take it in.
Well, that's the question. For that, you have to learn the sugya Bal Tosif, whether or not the bracha is a precondition to violation of Bal Tosif.
No, we're not in Bal Tosif. We're not in Bal Tosif now. if you say it's a
I
patur
heard
on
you say
Shabbos,
something. Oh, if you
if
were one pair or two pairs, what do you think?
no, I'm saying according to how the Rambam is paskening, that you take in one pair of tefillin at a time, because really Shabbos is man tefillin, but there's a patur. But when I put on those tefillin to take them inside, I'm becoming a mitzvah of tefillin. So I should make a bracha.
But that's a big question. Do you make a bracha on a mitzvah that you're not obligated to? You know, the Rambam is very opposed to women making a bracha on a mitzvah if it's man grama, even though the Rambam agrees that she gets schar for it. So, we're used to the, shall we say, Rabbeinu Tam hashkafa that, woman makes a bracha on lulav, on sukkah, on shofar. All this is against the Rambam. And the Rambam is very vehement about this. Now, truth be told, Bobby, I have to tell you the truth. I worked very hard, not in this context, in another context, on the concept of a kiyum mitzvah when I'm not obligated. Very complicated. Because, for example, the Ramah writes that if you sit in sukkah and you're not obligated, then you're a hejot. And the Rambam says that if you make a bracha when you're not obligated, it's a bracha levatola. And yet, in other cases, we seem to assume that there is such a thing as a mitzvah without a chiyuv. And we call it a kiyuv mitzvah without a chiyuv. I mean, Rabbi Yochanan says in Masechta Brachos, Halavaishi is pal adam kol yom kulo. I'm not obligated to daven more than once a day. I mean, 3 times a day. And Rabbi Yochanan advocates keep davening, over and over again. He's talking about Shemona Esrei. So at what point do we say, yeah, you know what? Fulfill a mitzvah even though you're not obligated. I once wrote a letter to Rav Nissen Alpert. I don't know if you ever heard of him, Zichron Livracha. And I asked him about this whole concept of a kiyum mitzvah without a chiyuv mitzvah, and what does it mean? And I can show you the letter. I still have the letter. I never discarded it, and I'm glad I didn't. And he writes, he doesn't understand it. Either Hashem wants you to do the mitzvah, and it's a chiyuv, or Hashem couldn't care less, and it's not a mitzvah at all. You know what I mean? Like, let's say, for example, I invite you to a restaurant, and there are 2 things on the menu. You can get meat or you can get fish. And you decide what you want. That's all. I mean, it's not a kiyum mitzvah. You're not going to get extra brownie points. I mean, again, I'm not talking about health. Some people don't want to eat meat because your cholesterol will get affected. I find that a little bit strange, but there are people who believe that. But leaving out Ushmaitem is Nafshel Seichem, which we spoke about last week. Do you remember we spoke about liquid gold last week?
Yeah.
Where he takes gold and he reduces it to a liquid. He burns it at a certain high flame. And so we said that maybe if he would cover his tefillin with liquid gold, then minamuta beficha, it's not minamuta beficha because it's very dangerous or something, or it can be mazik. We spoke about that last week. But by and large, I mean, this whole concept of a kiyum mitzvah without a chiyuv.
Well, isn't that the whole thing with women?
Talking about women in Korban Pesach. Yeah, what'd you say? What did you say, Joe? I heard you, but I didn't hear you.
No, I just asked. I mean, that's the whole. Isn't that the whole issue with women, with al mitzvahs, with all the mitzvahs that sheis b'zman grama that they do? I mean, is that not in the same parsha of what you're talking or asking about? And we say, according to Ashkenazim, they even make a bracha, let alone doing it. It's not in the same thing.
What I'm looking for is something different. I'm not looking for a chiyuv that applies to the men, and the women want to extend that chiyuv to apply to themselves. That's one thing. I'm talking about the existence of a mitzvah that from soup to nuts, from A to Z, it is a kiyum without a chiyuv. Is there such a thing? Does the Jewish constellation of halacha recognize the possibility that you could have a mitzvah which is not obligatory, and it's never obligatory. For example, the Ramban sheet about tefillah. The Eis Tzara, tefillah is a chiyuv d'oraisa. And in tzitzis, if I wear a beged dalet kanfos, is a chiyuv d'oraisa to wear tzitzis. And if I have a rooftop that's slanted, then I have a chiyuv to put up a makin. But is there such a thing as a mitzvah which never, ever, ever, not for me, not for you, nor for anyone, is not obligatory, but it's not like choosing between fish and meat. It's a kiyum mitzvah. Is there such an entity? You know,
What's Naziris?
What?
What's Naziris?
Well, 1 second. I say it again.
Shiluach HaKain.
Shiluach HaKain is a chiyuv.
No, but that's only if you want the eggs. Hang on. If you only want the eggs, then yes, if not.
Well, I'm
Not
saying
necessarily.
you don't have to run around looking for it, but if you find it, there's a mitzvah. Shalech v'shalach esayim.
Yeah, assuming you want the
In
eggs.
fact,
though.
some Rishonim say that even if you're not interested in taking the fledglings, you should still send away the mother bird. Again, that's
Chavis Yair says that. Chavis Yair says it against everybody
What
else.
about
okay,
a,
we're
what
not
about
going
a,
to learn Kol Tarkulin now. I want to learn with you the question of Klal Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim. Did they wear tefillin? I find that a fascinating question. At the time that they left Mitzrayim, could they possibly have worn tefillin? Forget about the technicalities. You know, they'd have to get an animal and shecht it. That's no problem. We'll survive. But there's only one basic problem. Tefillin require 4 parshios. They were given only 2 parshios when they left Mitzrayim, Kadesh and V'hoya Kiviyacha. They did not have the parshios of Shema Yisrael and V'hoyim Shemoah. Could they have possibly created tefillin with 4 parshios when they only had 2 parshios? And again, if you would ask me, I would say this whole question is a joke. No question about it. They didn't have 4 parshios. They didn't have tefillin. And yet, as we want to learn today, it's lo pashut. It's really a complicated issue. And I'm going to see a whole bunch of, a whole school of thought that maintains the view that they actually wore tefillin before they got the other 2 parshios. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that there was another entity of tefillin that only had 2 parshios? Does that mean that they knew about the other parshios even before they got them and they put it into their tefillin? Pretty wild, no? He says, "Me'emasai heichelu b'nei Yisrael," is page 169. L'kayim mitzvahs tefillin. He says on the surface level, it would seem that they got the mitzvah tefillin because the pasuk says right there at the beginning of Parshas Bo, when they left Mitzrayim, "Vayomer Moshe la'am, L'charas hayom hazeh asher yatzas mitzrayim kadesh likol b'chor, v'hoya lecha, v'hoya lios al yadecha zikaron b'neinecha." And then he has another parsha, v'hoya kiviyacha, v'hoya lios al yadecha l'tochos b'neinecha. Okay, the second pasuk, I don't know. I'm not so convinced about the second pasuk, because there's a t'nai in the second pasuk of v'hoya kiviyacha. But the first pasuk, we're already commanded with the Yetziah Mitzrayim to remember Mitzrayim, to sanctify the Bechor, and to wear tefillin. They didn't even have 2 of the 4 parshios. Hariyat Tzivui. Our Masai Kiyum. When would they fulfill that Kiyum? Can you take it Litzivui b'midbar? Can they do it immediately? V'lohaya b'yadem el shtei parshios? U'me'achashet tefillin zkukim li'arba parshios. Okay, for this we have to learn a sugya menachos daf chav ches, and the Gemara establishes that arba parshios ma'akvu zu et zu. It's an all or nothing proposition. If you don't have all 4, I'm learning in a different shir. I'm learning about Daled Kosos B'Leil Pesach. Have you ever learned Darei Pesachim well? I mean, thoroughly. When I proposed the idea, my chevra, we do Zoom over here, but it's on a different time zone. But we're learning Darei Pesachim. So they said, what Darei Pesachim? Come on, what are you teaching us like babies? Are you babies? Rabbosai, I want to tell you, for a month now, we're trying to figure out the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And it's so complicated. But one of the issues, again, this is a secondary issue, is whether or not you need all 4 kosos. Say here also, I have 4 parshas. I need all 4 parshas. The answer is yes. The Gemara says ma'akvos do it too. If you have only 3 parshas, it's like wearing 3 tzitzios on 3 corners of your bed and leaving out the 4th tzitz on the 4th corner. That's not tefillin. Arba parshas makvos zed. The problem is that only in Sefer Dvarim, what we call the Arbas Moab, at the end of Moshe's career, at the end of 40 years, that's when they get the parshas of Shema and Vayim Shema in Baschan and Ekev, wherever it is over there. So what do we have? We have tefillin without 4 parshas. So the Mabit says, parshas. He says it's impossible for them to be Mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin. And he says there's a whole bunch of mitzvahs that they weren't Mekayim in the 40 years during the Midbar. Tefillin is not the only one. Any mitzvah that's given in Sefer Dvarim, the Ramban says in his introduction to Sefer Dvarim that Sefer Dvarim is made up of 2 categories. There are mitzvahs that we already got, and now the Torah wants to mechadesh, new chidushim, and expand the mitzvah. There are mitzvahs that we never received. There are mitzvahs that were only given in Sefer Dvarim and Mishnah Torah. Says the Mabit, his last name was Tarani, from a very long scion of Italian rabbis, great rabbis. And I don't know if with Rav Ari, I know you're learning Daf Yomi. If you're learning Daf Yomi in Nedarim, the Mabit is critical, especially in these sugyas of what's called Hatoras Chacham, whether it's Pesach or whether it's Tos, whether it's Charata, all those different nuances. You have to know the Mabit. I mean, the Mabit basically says that there's no situation of Hatoras Nedarim on a D'oraisa level. The whole institution is D'Rabbanan, which can't be. I mean, it's impossible for the Mabit to have said that. But he was accused of saying that. Anyway, leaving it out. So the Mabit says that any mitzvah that was nischadesh in Arbas Moab, in Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe gave his long dissertation at the end of his career, lo nog 40 years they weren't known. Imagine. On both sides, where's the parsha of Kriyat Shema? It's in Sefer Dvarim. According to the Mabit, 40 years went by and they didn't recite Kriyat Shema because they didn't have the parsha. So you may think that that's Dvarim Shel Mavata. How could they have read the parsha of Kriyat Shema if they didn't have the parsha of Kriyat Shema till the last of the 40 years? And if they didn't have the parsha of Kriyat Shema, then they didn't have Tefillin, because Tefillin requires 4 parshas. And now this statement of the Mabit just gets everybody angry, so to speak. Like it wakes up the dead. And we start with the Kli Chemda and a whole bunch of Gedolei Achronim. They can't believe that for 40 years in the Midbar they didn't wear tefillin. Could that be? So in his commentary on the Torah called the Kli Chemda in Sefer Dvarim, he writes, B'nai Yisrael kimu mitzvahs tefillin b'midbar. Afal bishlo hoyer b'yedeiv eloshtei parshios. The Ersta Maisa, the Kli Chemda is saying that they wore tefillin for 40 years in the Midbar, and they only had 2 parshas. Says the Kli Chemda. It's like Tzvei Dinim and Tefillin. There are 2 entities of Tefillin, according to the Kli Chemda. There's Tefillin before Arbos Moab, and there's Tefillin after Arbos Moab. And before Arbos Moab, Tefillin had to max out at Kaddish Vayim Kiviyako with 2 parshas. I'm caught in a bind here because I don't know which sheet is more wild. There's nothing here that seems to talk to my heart. There's nothing that I can intuitively identify with. To identify with the Mabit is like suicide. 40 years in the Big One, they don't wear tefillin? But to identify with the Kli Chemda is also suicide. You're creating a new entity of tefillin that has only 2 parshios, when the Gemara says clearly, Arba parshios machmas, says, oh, says the Kli Chemda, that's only after they got the other 2 parshios. You know, it reminds me of the issue about Gerus with regard to Havas Karban. The Gemara in Krisus on Daf Tes establishes that a ger has to bring a Karban. So the Gemara asks, what about Bisman Hazeh? We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. Do we wipe off the whole entity of Gerus? So the Gemara has a special Xeris HaKosa that this Gerus Bisman Hazeh, because it says Lidoros Seichem in the parish of Gerus. And basically what we're saying is that if you have the opportunity to bring a Karban, because the Mikdash is standing, then there's no Gerus without a Karban. But if you don't have the opportunity to bring a Karban, there's a whole new entity of Gerus, a Mila and Tefillah without Karban. And it could be that the whole Sugi Ksubis on Daf Yud Aleph in Gerus, that Ger Kat Matbinos Al Das Bezdin, where's the Kabbalah's old mitzvahs? And once again, we're going to have to say that when it's possible to have Kabbalah's old mitzvahs, then it's an absolute precondition. But for the Katan, he's not capable of Kabbalah's old mitzvahs, then there's Gerus with Mila and Tefillah without Kabbalah's old mitzvahs. Bobby, you still there? I don't know. I can't believe you're not getting excited about this. Honestly, to me, this is like, you know, it's like gets me all to hits. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. Bruce had to leave because here it's Omashkia, so he had to go daven mincha. I was a smart aleck, and I davened mincha at 1:30 in the afternoon, so it wouldn't conflict with the shir. But really, I find this mind-boggling. You know, I wish I could take what is it called, a time machine? What do they call those things? You know, it's all in fiction, but you can go back into. I'd love to know, what did the Jews do for 40 years in the Midbar? Shishim Ribu strong. So the Batamachas didn't make a parnasa for 40 years? How did they support themselves? But that's the least of my problem. So Mimanashah, if you're going to tell me they didn't wear tefillin, I don't know. I find that very hard to believe. 40 years not wearing tefillin. If you can tell me they wore tefillin, so then you're caught in the clutches of the Kli Chemda that if they don't have 4 parshios and they only have 2, then ipso facto tefillin means 2 parshios. So, you know, bar mitzvah boys like to talk about tefillin. Ask a bar mitzvah boy if there's such a thing as tefillin with 2 parshios.
What did they get at Har Sinai?
I don't know if any tefillin fell out from Sinai. I don't know.
No, but
I don't see any tefillin.
In terms of the Torah and the parshios of the Torah.
Certain parshios they got even before Har Sinai. Other parshios they got after Har Sinai. But there's certain parshios that were given 40 years later, or let's call it 39 years later, 38 years later, at the time of Arvas Moah. And that's called Mishnah Torah. And those parshios,
and you can't say
that in tefillin, you know, you got a problem because 40 years before that, they had the command of tefillin, and they didn't have a pair of tefillin.
Why can't you say Kli Chemda is talking about once we have 4 parshios? Why do you have to say that if you don't have it, you don't have it? I mean, he's not talking about in the time when before they had it. They had tefillin for what they had then. They had the mitzvah. They had the 2 parshios, so they put it on the 2 parshios. Once the other ones came, they had to go back. It's like the winter tires we have here. Those guys made a ton of money these last few days. You know, everybody going back and forth.
But again,
you know what I'm saying?
The Gemara says Arba Parshios Ma'akvos Zuitzu. You can't have 2.
No, I understand. Once you have the Arba Parshios.
Okay, so that's the Kli Chemda. If you're happy.
No, but that's not. But the Kli Chemda is talking about when they had the Arba Parshios.
No.
Once we have the mitzvah.
That for 40 years in the Midbar, they wore tefillin with 2 parshios.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So if you're comfortable with the Kli Chemda, I don't want to upset you. There's no mitzvah on my part to make you unhappy if you're happy.
No,
I just thought maybe you could identify with my lack of happiness. To say there's an entity of tefillin with only 2 parshios, it just doesn't.
And what about the always?
In other words, it doesn't ring resonance.
What about the,
that you have tefillin with 2 parshios.
What about the always? If you're going to say that they're Mekayim all the mitzvahs.
Again, the same question. You have to ask about the Avos. What does it mean? And you should know that amongst Hasidim, I think, don't quote me on this, they don't take that Chazal literally. What they take it to mean, and it's all based on the Arizal and other Kabbalistic sources, is that they were Mekayim the Bechinos of the mitzvahs.
The essence.
Yeah, like the conceptual, theoretical. They didn't actually do this, But yet, I wasn't raised in that spot. I was raised in a different school. In the school that I was raised in, Avraham Avinu ate matzah on Leil Pesach.
Right.
You know what I mean? Literally. So he says on page 170 that he thinks he has a proof from Rashi, the Klei Chemda. Now, Rabosai, you're the jury. I'm going to present to you the argument of the Klei Chemda based on Rashi. This is Rashi in Parshas Bo in the Parsha of Tefillin. Rashi says, "Uletotafos bein einecha," and everyone from the time of the Tanoim until this day tries to figure out and decipher the word totafos. Rashi says that what's totafos? There are 2 languages here. And we're looking in 2 languages, respectively, for the word shtayim, the number 2. So there's a nation called the Tatvi nation, and they call shtayim in their language tat. And then there's an African nation, and they call shtayim pat. So we have tat pat, or totafos, without the vav. We'll see about the vav later. So Rashi says, "L'totafos beineinecha arba." Now cover the page here. What do you guess is going to be the next word here? After tat, pat means 2 plus 2, 4 what? What's going to be the next word? Hello? Anybody home? I guess in Toronto you can't hear me. I'm screaming my guts out. Okay, you're far away from me, so I understand why you can't hear me, but can you read my lips at least? What should be the next word in Rashi al Torah if you were writing Rashi, anticipating what Rashi is going to say? Shtayim plus shtayim what? What do you need for? For what?
For the Parshias.
Exactly, Parshias. The statement in Rashi. Rashi says, Al Shem Arba Batim. You need 4 batim. Rashi doesn't say a word about 4 parshios. So the totafos, which is the source for 4 parshios, Rashi calls them 4 batim. And now we get a shtickle Torah from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I call him Zatzal. Okay? Just for the record. Says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, open up Rashi in Sefer Dvarim. Rashi in Sefer Dvarim. In the 6th chapter of Dvarim, on the Pasuk L'Totafos, Rashi writes, Minyan Parshios Mikra Totafos. Says the Rebbe, what's going on here? You know, the Rebbe was probably the world's expert on Rashi al Torah, all time. Who would notice this distinction, this discrepancy? Whereas Rashi in Sefer Shmos in the Parsha Bo, where we have the mitzvah Tefillin for the Yotzei Mitzrayim, there it says in Rashi that Totafos is what? Is 4 batim. Rashi in Parshas Vayischanon, in the mitzvah that's given in Sefer Dvarim and Arvos Moav, Rashi's Totafos is 4 parshios. Why didn't Rashi and Shmos say 4 parshios? And the answer is There were no 4 parashiyos. And Rashi is telling you that the entity of litotafos, which is Tefillin Shorosh, splits into 2. There are 2 heftas of totafos. There's a hefta of totafos with 4 batim and 2 parshios, and there's a hefta of totafos with 4 parshios. But there couldn't be totafos of 4 parshios before they got to Aris Moah. And therefore Rashi has to find another explanation for the word totafos. 2 plus 2, batim. I'll tell you what I don't understand about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I'm not questioning this brilliant chiddush. I just want to know the answer to one question.
Sorry, so what is the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying, like, based on that?
He's saying that there's an entity called totafos that does not have 4 parshios. And that's going to support the view of the Kli Chemda that you, that you could, I should stop screaming. If my wife always gives me mussar, why do you scream? Believe me, if it wasn't Zoom, I wouldn't be screaming. Well, maybe I would. I don't know. Anyway, so what is the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying here? Why does Rashi avoid the word parshios? So the simple answer would be because there were no 4 parshios, and that's absolutely true. I mean, you can't say in Parshas Bo that there were 4 parshios. So what's the significance of number 4? Rashi though says that totafos in Parshas Bo means 4 batim. Now, again, I don't know, Bobby, is this the question that's crossing your mind, is crossing my mind? I don't know if it's the same. What does that mean according to Lubavitcher Rebbe? And basically, I would ask this question to the Kli Chemda as well. Did they have 4 batim, and there were only 2 parshios and 4 batim? That means there were 2 batim that were empty. And I'm going to submit to you that Enoch Hinami, that's what's going on. There's one halacha batim, another halacha parshios, and whether totafos should be interpreted as batim or parshios, both answers are correct depending upon what time frame you're in. Before the existence of 4 parshios, then the number 4, which is tat pat, must be referring to batim. But once the 4 parshios were given, then tat pat indicates a new entity of tefillin that emerged with the other 2 parshios, and the 4 refers to 4 parshios. So when the Gemara says in Menachos, Arba parshios ma'akfo zu et zu, that's the totafos of Parshas Va'eschanan. Not to deny that there's another entity of totafos, as given in Parshas Bo. Again, it's 2 plus 2, but it's not parshios. It's bat. Filei plum. I can't tell you, when I started this mimer, I was very skeptical. He starts by calling it mitzvahs tefillin me'emasai. Like he's probably parroting the first Mishnah in Shas, Kriyat Shema. I said to myself, what do you have to my Chinese here? I hear and said, me'emasai, this and that, but I see that this is a profound sugya here, because we don't know if there's an entity called totafos that's made up of 4, but not 4 parshios, but 4 batim. And when you compare the 2 Rashis, all of a sudden, like, something appears in front of your eyes that you never ever would have paid attention to. And now he wants to answer the Lubavitcher Rebbe another question. Why is the Torah talking this strange language of 2 plus 2, tat, pat? Just tell me 4. Actually, the Torah is very stingy on ink. The Torah could have said 4, arba, that's 4 letters, and totafos is so much more complicated. Well, again, it depends if you have the vav or not. He says the Torah went out of its way to tell you that tefillin is made up of 2 and 2, because that's going to have a tremendous nafkamina. 2 plus 2 means 4 batim, or 2 plus 2 means 4 parshios. Let's look at it inside. It's on page 170. Lama tofsa Torah tevas totafos hamora al arba b'tzira shtayim plus shtayim. Below Tofsa Teva Achas Hamoral Arba. Shekain Parshias HaTefillin Nosnu Lahem B'Shnei Zmanim. There were two tefillin that were given earlier when they left Mitzrayim, two parshias. Another two parshias that were given to Klal Yisrael 40 years later. Tchila b'midbar hinichu tefillin im shtei parshias bilvad. V'aras Moav hinichu tefillin im od shtei parshias. Is tos the Torah teva amor al shtayim v'od shtayim. See what he's saying here? This is unbelievable. That totafos means two, and then add another two. Initially, at historical stage one, there were only two. There was only Kadesh and Vaya Kiraka. But the Torah wants to tell you that there's going to be another two. It's not four parshios. And again, if you accept the Mabit, then call it four parshios, because there's no tefillin. This doesn't exist as an entity in halacha without four parshios. Never ever. But if you go with the Klichem, it's beautiful. Because what you have is a tefillin of two parshios, and the Torah wants to tell you there's 2 plus 2. Right now, Basheru Shav, there's only 2. And later on, we're going to add another 2. So it's 2 plus 2. Because in Aras Moav, we're going to add another 2 parshios and change the nature of tefillin. And then, I'm just looking at the clock here, we want to finish up with the Rashba. And the Rashba says something totally radically different than everything we've been saying. The Rashba says that when they left Mitzrayim, they had all 4 parshios. So again, let's understand. What the Rashba wants to accomplish, again, it looks like he's going to have to pull a rabbit out of his hat and do some magical trick, is that on the one hand, he wants to insist that tefillin equals tefillin equals tefillin. And that means 4 parshios. On the other hand, he wants to insist that even in the Midbar for 40 years before they got to Aras Moav, they were tefillin with 4 parshios. What's the Kosav HaShlishi? Kosav HaShlishi is that they already had 4 parshios. Now this Rabbosa is basically a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about how the Torah was given. And he says the following: Afal Pisha Parshio Shema V'Hayim Shavon Niktavu B'Sefer Dvarim. When were they actually codified as part of the biblical canon? That's only in Sefer Dvarim. Kevan Sha'amar Kosev B'Sefer Shmos T'Tafas Bein Echel Tefillin Nasa Ne'ara Parsha. Now we're in trouble here. Already in Parshas Bo, we're given Totafos. Says the Rashba, Totafos means 4 parshios. He doesn't have that fancy move with the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rashi that it's 4 batim. It's 4 parshios. How could it be 4 parshios in Parshas Bo? Or in our language, how could they have 1 film for 40 years? Al Kachach, says the Rashba, we have no choice. That call our boss, our parshios, Nemru b'nei Yisrael, im Yitzios of Mitzrayim. And I'll tell you the truth, if I would have said this, you would have laughed me out of the base measures, and you'd be rightfully so. But don't blame me, blame the Rashba. The Rashba says they left Mitzrayim, they got 4 parshios. Pili Ploim, they had 4 parshios. Now, he has a whole shtickle Torah of our mitzvah drasha from a young boy who was Rabbi Menachem Zembel Shalom's son, who died at the age of 19. He was a genius of geniuses. And his brother recorded some of his Chidushei Torah, including his bar mitzvah drasha. Okay, so I don't know if we have time for that now, but if you fast forward to page 172 at the end of this article, he makes reference to a Malbim. And if you ask me, with all the respect to the young bar mitzvah boy's drasha, the Malbim is what I call gleich, sumzach, much simpler. And this Malbim is in a sefer called Artzos HaChaim. I don't have it with me here, but I have a copy of it. And he goes through various mitzvahs, including the mitzvah tefillin. So in his writings, and by the way, I don't have to tell you, I don't have to sing the song of the the songs of praise of the Malbim. The Malbim is in a category of his own. I'm going to go very far and tell you that the Tanakh itself is a closed book without the Malbim. He's mind-boggling, the Malbim. He says, let's learn the Sugya Gittin Daf Samach. This is one of the most famous sugyas because of all this, the modern methodologies of how to study the Torah and biblical exegesis and all this. I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Feldman over Shalom in YU. I mean, he said certain things that he shouldn't have said, but whatever it is. So there's machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about how the Torah was given. Rabbi Yochanan says, Megillah Nitna. So that the Torah was given in stages until it was finally codified at the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's career when Hashem dictated the entire Torah to Moshe. So that's called Megillah Nitna. Every parsha was given to Moshe immediately when it was relevant. It wasn't recorded until the end of the 40-year period. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Again, there are complicated issues here which you have to look in the Sugya and Gittin Daf Samach. According to Rabbi Yochanan, says the Malbim, they really received all 4 parshas when they left Mitzrayim because the parshas were relevant to them insofar as they contained the mitzvah of Tefillin. According to Reish Lakish, Torah Chasuma Nitna means nothing was written until the end of the 40 years. It's kind of, if I can give a mashal, a man over Domen, Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnayos. That's not true. That's a mistake. A lot of people think that Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnayos. Various Tanoim wrote Mishnayos. A lot of them were written by Reb Meir. And what Rebbe did is in the last generation of Tanoim, he collected all that together. That's parallel to Rabbi Yochanan's Shita about the Torah itself. I'm not talking about Mishnayos, which is Torah Shebal Peh. I'm talking about Torah Shebitzav. Megillah Nitna. So let's say, for example, in Emor you have the Parsha, the Makoshi Sheitzim, or whatever it might be. That Parsha of the Torah, or in Baloscha you have the Parsha of Pesach Sheni. That Parsha was given at the time that the Anoshim Chashuvim came forward and they said, what do? We couldn't bring the Pesach, we were Tmeim. When were the Parshas collected and integrated to form one whole? That's at the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's career when HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated the entire Torah from Bereshis till the Yeni Kol Yisrael to Moshe Rabbeinu's ear. And he was the stenographer and he wrote it down word for word. But the Parshas themselves were given each Parsha as it was relevant. And that's called Megillah Nitna. So according to Reish Lakish, clearly they didn't have 4 Parshas until the end of the 40-year period. They only had 2 Parshas. So we don't have an answer to our question of how the Rashba could have the, pardon the expression, the chutzpah of telling me that even in the Midbar for 40 years they wore tefillin with 4 parshas. Impossible, according to Reish Lakish. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, we now have an opening because Rabbi Yochanan says Megillah Nitna. And if the 4 parshas were relevant to Klal Yisrael when they left Mitzrayim in order to fulfill the mandate that's codified in the parshas of Kadesh and V'hayim Kiviyachol, where the Torah commands us in Tefillin, how can they fulfill that? It must be that they were given all 4 parshas. So let's just very quickly summarize. We have 3 different approaches. The Mabit says, Chas v'shalom, they didn't wear Tefillin for 40 years. They only had 2 parshas. And the Kli Chemda says they wore 2 parshas. And the Rashba said they had all 4 parshas. And with that, I bid you a good week. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
What do you say, Rob? What do you say? Do you like that last concept that they were given?
I'll be honest with you. I think that according to Rabbi Yochanan, I get out of this dilemma. I'm in a mimon of shach emotionally. I can't tolerate the mabit that there was no tefillin worn for 40 years. On the other hand, I can't tolerate the Kli Chemda that the tefillin had only 2 parshas. With all due respect, and I know, Joe, you're very comfortable with the Kli Chemda, so go ahead. But I personally am not comfortable with it.
But this idea that
I'm more comfortable with the Rashba that you tell me they wore tefillin for 40 years and they had 4 parshas in the tefillin. It wasn't a new chefs of tefillin.
Yeah, and this does not
but they
go
had the
against.
4 parshas.
And this does not go against the concept of ein muktam b'Torah by saying this, would you say? It does not go against
No,
it.
I have to think this out because you need to learn the sugya of Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. That's Gittin Daf Samach. It's not an easy sugya. I mean, I could say it over the way I did now, be'ofen shitchi, just from the surface level. But you really have to plow through that sugya. It has tremendous ramifications. But you're asking, if let me see if I can work this out the way you want to say it. And you tell me if this is what you mean. If you hold like Reish Lakish, then the principle of ein mukta mucha b'Torah is very difficult because Hashem dictated the Torah in one fell swoop to Moshe Rabbeinu from Bereshis till the Kol Yisrael. So what do you mean ein mukta mucha b'Torah? According to Reish Lakish, according to Rav Yochanan, Rav Yochanan could justify ein mukta mucha b'Torah. Why? Because in historical context, sequentially, or shall we say, what's the word I'm looking for? Chronologically, it could be that a parsha that appears later was given earlier. So, now you can say mukta mucha. So, this would require a lot.
No, I'm just asking from that point of view. Is with regards to actions, the idea that that this was given and it was written down. That's not necessarily a question of muktam and mucha. It's just like you said, how it was written. That won't necessarily argue against it. I mean, that's the way.
It just you can ask the question whether the sequence of the psukim in the Torah is a chronological sequence.
I would ask another question.
That according to Reish Lakish, it should be chronological because Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in front of him all the various Megillos, and he organized them. So it's logical to organize them in chronological order. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, you have parshas in the Torah that you'll get 40 years later that were given already 40 years earlier, and you could begin to open up a petach of ein mukta mucha b'Torah. Again, I think we're getting way off our topic here.
But I would ask the question differently. If you say Megillah, it's mashma that they got it as they got it. Like Megillah,
well, I would add one word if you'll allow me, Bobby. They got it as it was relevant. Do you follow me?
Yeah, but in other words, you
can't give me a mitzvah tefillin, which is written in the parshiyos of Kadesh and V'hoya Kiviyachar, and give me a mitzvah, and then tell me, well, I'm sorry, buddy, but you only have two parshiyos.
But I thought what it means normally when it says Kol Parsha Sh'Nemar LaMoshe Hoya Takev Kaisva V'Noisna L'Bnei Yisrael, that means that when it was said to Moshe, meaning in the chronology of the Torah, then he gave it to them.
Right. That's not that he took
a parsha from the Torah.
And that's Reish Lakish is going to probably reject that statement. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, there may be a whole variety of reasons why the parshas were given at a certain time and only codified as part of the biblical canon, as we say, at the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's career. One reason might be because they were given already to Moshe Rabbeinu. Another reason might be there was a response to a question that was asked to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Bnei Tzlofchad wanted to claim ownership on, Yerusha on the land. So that parasha of Bnei Tzlofchad was given way before the end of Aretz Moab. And Rabbi Yochanan would say that's a Megillah that was given at that time. And we mentioned the other names, Bakoshesh and Pesach Sheni. I mean, there are many, many questions that came up during the 40 years, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to respond to them. You take, for example, the Isser of not taking a double portion of man on a weekday. Not on Friday. Right? Omer Legul it's like a lav. Okay, the Rambam maybe doesn't count it in the lavim because it's not ledoros, it's only l'shah. But was that given as a parsha at the beginning of Bishalach when they needed the parsha, when they had the Isser of man, all the different dinim that applied to man? According to Reish Lakish, it's a very paradoxical situation in a sense that the parsha, as we know it, of Man was invented, so to speak, as an entity only at the end of the 40 years.
Right.
So again, I didn't mean to open up a Pandora's box here. I mean, obviously, I'm not ready for this, but we should be studying B'li Neder, the sugya in Gittin Daf Samach. It has tremendous ramifications. I didn't mean to open up that Pandora's box. What I did mean to open up was the Rashba has a solution which in a sense could satisfy us, at least if you hold like Reb Yochanan, on so many different levels. They were from a Yidden. They got the mitzvah of Tefillin. They walked Tefillin. They didn't postpone it for 40 years. Don't give me that stuff. I can't tolerate that Mabit. Just like I can't tolerate the Mabit who says that there's no Ataris Nedorim in Oraisa. It just doesn't exist. And his son, who's the Marit, took him to task. It's very rare that the Marit argues against his father, the Mabit. Of course, the Mabit is more famous not for his halachic stuff. He's more famous for his Beis Elokim, his philosophical works and so forth. But he was a first-class Meshit, and many of his chuvas are classic. But this one, so they didn't wear tefillin for 40 years. I'm not satisfied with that. But on the other hand, I'm not satisfied with the Kli Chevna. They can design tefillin with two parshas. Again, Lubavitcher Rebbe helps me a lot with the Kli Chevna. That's a brilliant diuk and analysis of Rashi, comparing the two Rashi. I mean, the whole shir was worth it just for that shtickle Torah in Rashi. And now we have the Rashba. The Rashba is going to satisfy it. Yeah. They were from a Yidden. They got a mitzvah of tefillin and they want tefillin. Yeah. Tefillin has got to have 4 parshas, not less. Less than 4 parshas won't cut the muscles. Nitkin schefter shel tefillin. But they had also parshas. And that can make sense in the light of Rabbi. Okay, there, Rabosai, I'm going to go.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
A wonderful week.
You too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a good Chodesh.